Welcome to Don't Everybody Leave. Say howdy to Mac King.
Howdy, I am Matt King. Welcome to Don't Everybody Leave. And man, I'm very excited about this show. One of my oldest friends, Mr. Max Maven, is going to join us in a little bit. And man, I think I've known Max. We'll figure out how long I've known him when we talk to him. We can bring everybody out. I'm excited for everybody to meet Max and chat. Max and I don't really remember what year we met. He'll probably remember. He's better at that than me. But you know, he's had more influence on my show than anybody. I'll probably tell him that again when we come out with him. But and I was very hesitant. We've been doing practice shows, and some of them will probably air, and some of them we probably won't. And I wanted to wait till we were better at this before we invited Max on, because he means so much to me.
And then you realized it wasn't going to happen.
We're just not going to get any fucking better. So why not now?
Sorry, Max. We love you.
No, it's true. It's really true. So there's Jason, Vinny. Vinny, you're muted. Jacob, Jax, Nick Diffatte, Michael Goudeau.
I would like to say that you did not just add that Max Maven Mind Games cardboard cutout over your shoulder for this show. That's been there for every single show. So in case Max thought that was just for him today, that's not. That's been there every single one of these shows we've done.
Yeah. So I have Max Maven, over my left shoulder. And then right above him is my brother. And then sideways, and then above that is Extreme Pancakes. You can only see the bottom half of that. And then to the left of my brother there is my grandpa Elwood on a Wheaties box. And then
was he an athlete?
He was not. But he gave that to all his grandchildren for Christmas one year. And so
greatest athlete.
And then on the other side, I have Billy the Mime, and so I feel like those are my two the little consciences that sit on my shoulder. I got Max on one side and Stephen Banks on the other, telling me what to do. And
which is an angel, which is a devil.
Exactly.
Right. The funny part is Billy the Mime is telling you what to do, but you can't hear him. You have to turn around and look. So the rest of us know what you should be doing, but
here's what I should be doing. An evening at Monticello. For those of you who aren't regular watchers, we usually start out by, hey, somebody died. Who died, Jacob?
Well, there's a couple. One I want Jason to talk about, but one I would like to talk about is a guy named Danny Ray, who even if you think you don't know who that is, you know who that is, because for 46 years he put James Brown's cape on him at the end of the show. And he also introduced James Brown for at the beginning of every show for like 6.5 minutes. And then sometimes again in the middle. And it was the greatest. As a kid, I memorized. Yeah.
I was going to say, I was just going to say, you didn't even have to say as a kid, I memorized. I bet you could do all 6 minutes right now with no cue cards, no prompting, anything.
Okay. As long as I'll do an abridged version. As long as this is an homage, not an impersonation. It's an homage.
Gotcha.
Okay. Right about now, it is star time. Please. I got the feeling. Living in America. Are you ready for the Godfather of Soul? The hardest working man in show business? Soul brother #1, known all over the world? Then everybody, let's call the king of soul himself, James Brown. James Brown. There he is, the Godfather of Soul, James Brown. That's a short. Those are the highlights.
Nice.
So he would do that. I mean, he would get the audience to chant for like 2 minutes, which is like, okay, but we paid. We want him to come out, right? We paid to see him.
Yeah, that's one of the many things I stole from James Brown.
Name chanting
and the cape.
Yeah, the cape and the pompadour.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was just kind of a really fun, eccentric figure in pop culture, and so
that's why you have James Brown over your shoulder. But coincidentally, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk. We should make sure we talk to Max about James Brown, because Max is a James Brown scholar.
Wow, nice.
I mean, not officially. I don't believe he has that degree, but
We should find a way to get him that official title.
the honorary James Brown doctorate. So there was another person. Who else died?
Yes, the great character actor Hal Holbrook passed away. And Jason actually worked with Hal Holbrook, so I want to hear any and everything in real time of spending time with Hal Holbrook.
Wow.
Turtleneck.
So Hal Holbrook.
That was before COVID, when you could get your hair dyed.
Yeah, exactly. So I met Hal Holbrook, or as I referred to him, Soul Brother number 2, on the set of Shade, which we filmed in. I want to say we filmed it in June of 2002. So he was on the set. I don't know if he was there for a day or a day and a half or what, but I got to talk to him. And as someone who never got to meet Di Vernon, to see him in character as Vernon in that setting, I mean, if we'd been at a diner somewhere, it probably wouldn't have been as powerful. But to have him actually sitting at Vernon's couch, dressed the way he was, and he had met Vernon before, so he kind of
met Vernon, but you hadn't.
I got into magic only about 2 years before Vernon passed away. And so I believe he had already left the castle and was living with Ted, his son, in San Diego by 1990 or so, which is when I got into magic. And if he hadn't, it wasn't much longer after that he left. So I never really had a shot at meeting the professor, although I did mail him a playing card to autograph for me, which he autographed and sent back to me. So I got that right before he passed away. But, sitting with Holbrook was great. Earl Nelson was the one that, had spent the most time around Vernon. And he was, he was the one that really impressed upon us how good Hal Holbrook looked. He didn't sound anything like Vernon except when he was in character and trying to recreate that high-pitched voice, but he looked great. And it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun for sure.
Did you notice that Di Vernon seemed a little Mark Twainish in many of those moments?
A little.
It just can't be better timing, right? Because I believe Max Maven also to be the honorary doctorate of Di Vernon. So
possibly Mark Twain as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he was Max was, I believe, a contemporary of Mark Twain. So
you said he was your oldest friend.
Shall we bring Mr. Max Maven in here?
Let's do it.
Hey, like I said, it's one of my oldest friends and more influence on my act than I think anybody, maybe even me.
Well, howdy.
Howdy.
That's where you got it.
Right.
Dang it.
I got that. Yeah.
It's nice to be here. There's already so many things I can comment on, starting with the fact that I knew Elwood.
All right. My grandfather Elwood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the Wheaties box.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite Max Maven Elwood stories. You can relate that, maybe.
Nick and I, because of our age, Elwood and Di Vernon are equally as legendary to us.
Right.
We're gonna say it was Thanksgiving that you were there. It might have been when we did that benefit with me and you and Lance and Marty Polio for the Chosen
maybe it was.
Agency. I think it might have been that in Louisville, and so Elwood, both my grandfathers were there, I think, for that. But Elwood, in particular, my favorite thing that happened was he's an old man, and he goes up to my good friend Max Maven
and says, "There's something on your tie."
And bam!
Yep.
So fantastic.
So I have footnotes for everything that's been discussed on the show so far.
Oh, okay.
Oh my.
Because someone mentioned about Danny Ray. Well, Jacob was talking about Danny Ray and the Cape routine. And it's worth mentioning that James Brown did not invent the Cape routine. He actually copied it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
From Gorgeous George.
For those of you who are, a little bit behind in your Max Maven lore, he's a big James Brown scholar, Di Vernon scholar, and professional wrestling scholar.
Yeah, so you've set me up. I mean, I could just keep going for the next hour about it.
Yeah.
No, please do.
Gorgeous George was a wrestler with a very over-the-top, flamboyant style and a lot of shtick. And he had a major influence on two people who then became famous in their own right. One of those being James Brown, who took the Cape idea. And the other one was Muhammad Ali,
Oh yeah.
who took a lot of his kind of boastful interview style from Gorgeous George.
Wow.
When did Gorgeous George retire? Because I feel like I wasn't really into pro wrestling, but my younger brother John was.
Yeah.
And
he died in 1963, so probably right before that.
Yeah, he did not end well. He drank himself to death, basically. But in the late 40s, when television was just starting to be a genuinely national thing, one of the first hits on television was wrestling, because it was in early television, the visuals weren't very easy to see. I mean, it was not a very clear picture. So something like wrestling, which played very broad, with broad actions, worked on television better than a lot of other things. And wrestling became one of the first big hits of American television. And the first real TV star from wrestling was Gorgeous George, who became a national phenomenon.
wait, I want to know how close Jacob's rendition for James Brown's introduction was. Because I'm sure
it was pretty accurate. The big flaw in Jacob's rendition was that it was intelligible.
That's true. Danny Ray had the worst diction of any human ever to exist.
I thought you were going to say his hat, but
that was the second point.
I never met Danny Ray. I have no personal issues one way or the other, but man, you could bear. I mean, there are people who say that James Brown was hard to understand when he spoke, and he sounded like Laurence Olivier in comparison to Danny Ray. This is for Jacob. There's a guy up in Canada, a rapper named So-Called, based in Toronto. Does rap that combines the kind of typical R&B beats and so forth with klezmer music.
Wow.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, no, klezmer music is, and Max will have a better description of it than I will, is traditionally Yiddish Jewish music played by a band with clarinets in it. That's okay. So I butchered that. Your turn to describe it.
That's really close. I think that's pretty accurate. But here's the deal. So-Called has been doing in the last years these rap things that involve klezmer and everything else. And one of the people he's been collaborating with is Fred Wesley.
Wow.
He was the head of the JBs.
Yeah.
If you've ever heard any James Brown stuff from the early 70s on, where there's a trombone part and frequently a trombone solo, that's Fred Wesley. Well, Fred Wesley is still active, and he's been doing klezmer rap.
Does he have a biography, autobiography?
It's called Hit Me, Fred. There's one of the bookcases is all music. And one of the shelves that is hidden by my head right now is about 75% books about James Brown.
Wow. I'm out of my league. I should talk about these just real quick because they're fun. This album, you probably all know the song from it, "Living in America," which was in Rocky IV, which is an awesome song. I'm a big proponent of James's 80s stuff, which is more kind of synthy than it is funky, but I still think it's great. And this album is called "Take a Look at Those Cakes," and it has an 11.5-minute song on it talking about how much James likes butts. And he even says things on it like, Stevie Wonder can even tell. Look at those cakes. Ray Charles can even tell. Take a look at those cakes. I don't know that anybody could get away with that without being run out of show business, but he managed to.
I dated a girl who was traveling with James Brown for one date. Yeah, one of the background singers. And for the one date, we went out to Red Rocks to go hiking. And it was kind of... There was no cell phone service or anything out there. When we got back into cell phone range, she had received a message from James Brown saying, "We're having a rehearsal. Where the hell are you?" And she started sobbing because he apparently fined anyone for being late. And it was her day off, but she wasn't even allowed to actually have a day off. She was supposed to sit where she could answer the phone if James Brown called her instantly. Poor thing.
In that, before the show started, we were mentioning that this legendary concert that James Brown did in Boston that was telecast. And one of the moments in that concert, he's dancing in front of the band, and you see him turn to the band with a big smile and turn to one of the musicians, and he starts throwing fingers out. And what he's indicating is how much the player is going to have to pay in fines for whatever the perceived, because his shoes aren't properly shined, or the crease in his pants isn't good enough, or he missed a note. And every finger means $5. So he's just smiling, going, 5, 10, 15, you're on the hook for $20.
I mean, that sounds like an exaggeration, but I heard an interview with one of his background vocalists that said, "I got fined for having a wrinkle in my dress," and he would just turn and go like that,
Yep.
So
you said something about how white Jason England was earlier, but Nick.
Well, I was just going to say, looking at the display,
right?
That maybe
there
I
is
was
a particularly white square
in my defining of Jason, since at least on the way the screen is configured for me, Jason is immediately next to Nick. And you put them side to side, yeah, Jason, you're not very white at all.
Yeah, I believe Nikki can put up a picture proving the fact. Yeah,
there we are. Yep. So for Halloween, I dressed as James Brown one year.
Oh my goodness,
it's my 10.
Yeah, my dad had all the albums. I asked. We went out, bought a wig, and I think I may have borrowed it from Jimmy Grippo, and and there we are.
If you didn't have one of the other kids come put that cape on you and then throw it off and then have him put it on you again.
I thought that Jimmy Grippo tied for second place in the worst toupee in Magic.
For second place?
Yeah.
Okay, so who are those other two that you're
right?
Also tied for second place was Ed Marlowe. Ed and Jimmy looked like an animal had died. Either before or just after being placed on the person's head.
Yeah.
But the single worst toupee in the history of Magic was Tony Cardero, also known as Senor Torino, also known as Tony London. Tony was from New England, and he had a relatively early bird act under the name Senor Torino. He did close-up under the name Tony Cardero and published a bunch of card stuff. Jason, you must know about that.
Sure. And the KM move was him and Marlowe.
He did stand-up comedy as Tony London. But his toupee looked like someone had taken, and try and stay with this, Jacob and Nick, you may miss this reference as a kind of age thing. It looked like someone had taken an LP record. Do you kids know what that was?
I got two on the wall.
All right, and melted it on his head.
And not a 45, right? It was a lot. It was an LP.
Oh, he had enough hair that it would have to be a full LP. Yeah, but that was Tony Cardero's toupee.
Wow.
Early on, Max, one of my most, I have a number of gifts from Max. One of my favorites is he autographed a copy of Harpo Speaks to me. It's something like everything I ever learned about show business, I learned from this book. And if you haven't read Harpo Speaks, man, it's so
wonderful.
fantastic.
It changed my life, that book.
Yeah.
If anyone has seen my theater show, I talk about that book in the show. I came upon that book when I was about 11 years old. And I read that book and was introduced to a world of people that up until that moment I knew nothing about. The Algonquin set.
Yeah.
Right.
Which was a group of witty literary people in New York in the 1920s. And that book was just a doorway into
I mean, Alexander Woolcott, Dorothy Parker, who else was in there?
Robert Benchley.
Yeah, Robert Benchley's who I was trying to think of.
Robert Benchley, whose son wrote Jaws?
Is Peter Benchley is Robert Benchley's son, right?
I believe so.
If that's so, I didn't know that.
I've only read the beginning of that book because I was reading it when I was house sitting for Mac once, and it started to fall apart. And since you inscribed it to him, I figured I shouldn't help it fall apart. I should get my own copy, which I need to do. But even before he gets to talking about show business, growing up as a little kid in New York, being broke.
It's an amazing book, start to finish.
Unbelievable. The jobs he had, and that his brother Chico had a gambling problem when they were 12, not just as an adult. It's amazing.
It also, I sort of took his story about that he told his kids about adoption, about how they had searched until they found the right kid, and told my kids the same thing when they were adopted, and since then.
Wow.
So, yeah, it really,
I didn't know that.
Moving and beautiful. It's part of why we play croquet as much as we do. Was their motivation, their inspiration.
I think that's right. Yeah, that's how I first started getting interested in the croquet, was reading about those guys playing croquet and the crazy stuff that they would do, trying to get a ball around a big tree. And so, somebody would go, and there was a couple of old tires, and they would cut a tire in half and put the tire around the tree so that the ball could go inside the tire and go around the tree to hit another ball. That was the only possible way they could win this croquet match, was to get that ball around the tree. And it's just nuts.
Yeah, and in tribute to Harpo, you have done stuff like hit my ball onto a swan that's floating in your pool so that I have to stand on the swan to keep playing.
In the pool, yeah.
And
the other showbiz bio that you told me I should read is Act One.
Oh, yeah. I think Act One by Moss Hart is a wonderful introduction to Broadway, to the world of Broadway theater. It's one person's version of that journey, but I think it's a great read. It also turns out that a lot of it isn't true. And years later, an author whose name I don't recall off the top of my head, but put out a book called Dazzler, which was a serious biography of Moss Hart. All the stuff that Moss Hart left out or tweeted. And it's a pretty great book. It's not as charming a ride as Act One, but if you're curious about Moss Hart, it's worth reading. It says something. Moss Hart's wife and then widow was a woman named Kitty Carlisle.
Of course.
Who in the 50s was a big TV personality. One of the first celebrities who was famous for being famous. And when this guy was writing this book, Dazzler, about her late husband, and she realized that this was going to be a true biography, she refused to talk to him.
She's in showbiz. That's what showbiz is all about, isn't it? You got to write your own bio. People who read the bios in the playbook don't understand that you wrote it yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
William Hearst once
Not William Hers.
no.
That's our agent.
William Hearst, a successful mogul.
Is it mogul? Doesn't that imply success? I just want to point out. Okay.
John DeLorean, unsuccessful mogul.
Anyway, wasn't it Hearst who had the line, "Print the legend"?
Oh,
I don't know.
Or was that?
I know that quote, but
Anyway, but the premise being, if you've got to choose between honest reporting or something that has captured the public's imagination, print the legend.
Do you remember what year we met, Max?
It was right around 1980, maybe 81.
I want to say it was after March of 81. And the only reason I say that is in the summer of 1981, I was working at Tombstone Junction with Lance, and I had a subscription to Genie Magazine. And my favorite issue of Genie Magazine came out in March of 1981.
wow. That's beautiful.
I can tell you when we were in the same room for the first time, but we didn't know each other.
Oh, what's that?
That's the summer of 1978. I performed. You and Lance were in the audience, and
yeah, it was the greatest. I mean, we thought we were hot. We were like 18-year-old kids at Abbott's, and we thought we were the shit, right? And so we're sitting in the bleachers. We're sitting in the bleachers, and this guy walks up, and he's, and I don't know, I'm sure I've asked you this before, Max. You're wearing a black suit, and I believe now it was the sleeves were lined in white.
No, I had my shirt sleeves rolled back.
Yeah,
so they were white.
But you didn't have a shirt on. You were wearing a vest, a black vest. And there was no shirt collar or shirt front.
Yeah, I did that for a while, so I probably did do it at Abbott's, where I had a white shirt, but I'd cut the collar and the front of the shirt off, so the vest.
So you just had your manly chest hair. It was like already a mystery, right? Where's the rest of his fucking shirt?
And Max has made some interesting fashion choices in his life. And I don't know if I could get him to tell my favorite story about one of his fashion choices.
I went to college at Brandeis University. My father was a professor at the university, and we had made an agreement when I was accepted into college that we would attempt to ignore each other. I was going to try and be a college student on my own, and he was going to attempt to be a professor on his own, and we weren't going to get in each other's way. And we pretty much kept to that. And during my sophomore year, so this would put it at 1969, I got a phone call from my father who said, "Could you come to my office?" So I came to his office. He had an office on like the second or third floor of a building that overlooked the central area of the college campus. So there were these kind of paths that people walked along, and to get from anywhere to anywhere on the Brandeis College campus, you almost always had to cross that particular area. So I go to his office and he says, "Listen, I know I said I'd stay out of your way, but yesterday I happened to be looking out the window and I spotted you crossing the campus. And you were wearing a loincloth over your blue jeans." And he said, "I'm not going to ask you why. I'm just going to ask you, please don't ever wear that again." And I didn't. I threw it away. I had this great pair of bell-bottom blue jeans that just were perfect. They fit perfectly. The hang, the drape, all that stuff was just perfect. and the crotch wore out. So I couldn't wear them anymore because now there were these gaping holes in the crotch. But I didn't want to throw them away because I really liked the way they draped. So I took a piece of bed sheet material and spattered it with black ink so it made a sort of interesting abstract. And then once it was dry, looped it through my belt in front and back so that it formed a loincloth. I thought this was a very good solution. My father did not.
I'm going to go with you on this. I think your father's wrong.
Yeah.
Well, in fairness to him, it was the only time he ever asked me not to wear something when I was walking across campus. I mean, he managed to get through 4 years, and that was the only time that he could not stop himself from begging me to change wardrobe. But I'm considering what I used to wear in those days. His restraint was admirable.
Does he come to you in dreams still today to advise your wardrobe?
No, I think we got past that.
I think that's evidence that there's no afterlife.
I think such evidence, there's much more evidence than that. But yeah, one more added piece of evidence.
Wait, but in '78, when we met, or when we were in the same room, I mean, so he walks out and he's Max Maven, right? He's that guy. We'd never seen anything like that. And then every trick, I mean, literally every trick, you know, smart guy Lance Burton and smart guy Matt King, you know, look at each other like, I got no idea. It was unbelievable how great that magic show was.
That was the close-up show.
Yeah, that was the close-up show.
Yeah, it was 4 quadrants of a high school gymnasium.
Yeah, it was awful.
Yeah.
Max, the only lecture notes I ever bought were from one of your presentations.
Wow. I'm flattered.
Yeah.
You got a juggler to buy magic lecture notes.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't believe I've ever bought any Max Maven lecture notes.
I didn't say they were the only ones I ever had. The only ones I ever paid for were Max Maven's.
So there's a photograph in that 1981 Genie magazine, Max, that hooked up with me. And I don't know whether we can bring that up, Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that photograph accompanied a little one-page article because you put that whole issue together. And I would assume because of the day, because I've seen you do this in the past, it was Letraset, right? It wasn't computer.
That's not Photoshop because Photoshop didn't exist. Weird story about that photo. The whole gag of that article was it was an interview between Max Maven and Phil Goldstein. And I thought it was funny that Phil Goldstein in the photograph is wearing a T-shirt that says David Hoy is my psychic.
Right.
The day the issue came out, or at least the day the issue was received in Paducah, Kentucky, Dave Hoy, who lived in Paducah, called me on the phone to tell me how funny he thought the photograph was. He died that night.
Wow.
So if I hadn't had that photograph, it probably would have haunted me for years, not knowing if he'd seen it, and I probably wouldn't have, it probably would have been an uncomfortable photograph to look at. But the fact that Dave thought it was howlingly funny.
Well, and it's right on the shirt that says Paducah and then his zip code. It said David Hoy is my psychic, and then underneath that, what's really blurry says Paducah and then 42 something, which is the zip code for Paducah, which is weird. Why would he put that on there? I wonder.
Unfortunately, since we've established there's no afterlife, we're not going to be able to ask it.
You mentioned that photograph accompanied an interview with Phil Goldstein and Max Maven, a dialogue between the two of them. I mean, I think we've almost explained it, and you could read between the lines that there was a guy, Phil Goldstein, who was you years ago, and now that guy's pretty much gone, except for maybe for your sister or something.
No, they call me Max. It's not great, but considering that I would have been 30 when I wrote it.
I was 30 when I read it just now.
I was there, a kid in Tombstone, and I just thought it was the greatest. And it was also, I believe at that time, I was still doing the Belgian, right?
Yes, you were.
Right. So there was, I had that same sort, it wasn't, you had 10 years on me. But at the time, I thought that was going to be something I did the rest of my life, that character. And so I had that same sort of, here's Mac King and here's the Baron Maximilian von King. And that really spoke to me in some weird, deep way.
But with a lot less Latin.
If there is an afterlife, then what might get me into heaven is that I talked you out of doing the Belgian character.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
For the viewer at home, it was a Belgian character wearing a Viking helmet with horns on it.
It was Andy Kaufman's foreign man wearing a Viking helmet.
Right, and that was the big issue, right? It wasn't that it wasn't funny or that it wasn't whatever, but when I started doing it, I hadn't really seen Andy Kaufman do that. I was just being a guy that I thought was funny and the foreign accent, etc. But because he showed up on the scene, a little bit after I started doing it, I started getting more and more. Oh yeah, like Andy Kaufman, I get it. Great.
I get it. I'm derivative.
Exactly.
Jason, is that Bill Hicks behind you?
It is. So I'm a huge Bill Hicks fan, and years ago,
as everyone should be,
this painting popped up on eBay, and so I bought it. And I've had it. Gosh, I've probably had it 20 years, something like that. And I was just moving some things around and set it on a chair back there, and kind of liked the way it looked, so I left it for the last show. And Max is of course, recognized him. That's a painting of a famous Bill Hicks photograph. So whoever painted that just, I think, put it on an overhead projector and then painted it because it really looks perfect. But anyway,
I think Goudeau, didn't you work with him or hang out?
The first time I met Max Maven, he was at the Laugh Stop in Houston, Texas, and I was working around the corner at the Comedy Workshop with Bill Hicks.
Yeah, I worked. I used to work the Laugh Stop more than once a year. It was about once every 8 months.
Yeah, it was probably 1983. Yeah,
and one time. Well, this is all during the 80s, but there was one time where usually if you worked one, you didn't work the other. So if you worked the Laugh Stop, you didn't work the Comedy Workshop.
Right.
Versa. Yeah. And I knew the Comedy Workshop primarily because of Bill Hicks, who I was slightly aware of, not as aware of as I later became. Otherwise, I would have made a point of going over to see him work, which I never did. But at one time, and I don't remember exactly how or why, but I wound up getting a booking at the Comedy Workshop. But he was out of, he would have still been alive, but he was not in town. Because I gather normally, if he was in town, he would have come to see the show, whoever was booked there.
Yeah,
I never did
every night, and then did also they had like open mic night, late night every night, and so he was there every night.
Yeah, but I never did cross paths with him. But boy, I admire.
Well,
it's pretty impressive.
The Laugh Stop there. So I never did work the workshop because I was always working the Laugh Stop. And somebody brought. I met him because somebody brought him in to see me at the Laugh Stop. But
apparently nobody thought he'd like my work because that never happened.
Well, I think it might have been that one of the guys.
Probably me on both those.
I don't. No, I think it was because I don't. He may not have come in to see me. Jimmy Pineapple was the opening.
Sure.
And I think he was friends. He and Bill.
He was another workshop guy. Yeah, he was at the workshop all the time. Laugh Stop had, I think, a better quality of headliner, dare I say that, than Workshop. The Comedy Workshop was a smaller club.
It was a class. The Laugh Stop was a classier club.
Yeah,
not necessarily in terms of
They
playing.
had more money, I
The
think.
Laugh Stop had a raised stage.
Yeah.
Audience on 3 sides, decent lighting. And I remember the Comedy Workshop, that maybe I'm misremembering, but I think I remember that the stage was all of like 6 inches
Yeah, it was a small
higher
riser.
than the room. And, you know, not great sight lines and not great lighting. It was, I don't want to make it sound like it was a dive. It wasn't, but it was just the Laugh Stop had a classier image.
Yeah, it was much more. Laugh Stop was much more of a theater than the Workshop.
Yeah, I think Howard Trustman had a little more money. The guy who owned, he and his wife Sandy. Was it Sandy? Yeah. So I think they had a little more money. And for those of you, 6 of you watching the show, those of you who only know Max Maven from books or more recent TV things, back in those days, I mean, we worked a lot of the same clubs. We never worked together, but we worked a lot of the same places. And Max, almost every club I worked, Max had the attendance record in these comedy clubs. And, a lot of people don't think of Max as like a headlining comedian.
Well, I wasn't a headlining comedian.
Well, right. But I mean, you're headlining comedy clubs.
A headliner in comedy clubs, but that doesn't, I was not trying to go for, I've never considered myself to be a comedian. I think I get my share of laughs as a performer when I usually, because I want to, and not because
they're laughing with you, not at.
That's the theory.
But the show that I saw, you opened with the boo.
Yeah.
And big laughs. That was the first time I saw you.
Laughter, and I headlined comedy clubs as my primary work for 13 years.
Yeah.
78 to 91, that was my primary work. And there was enough laughter within the show that people didn't leave and say, I thought this was supposed to be a comedy club. I'm offended.
Yeah, that was bullshit. I only laughed.
But I wasn't going for, the laughs were enough, but that wasn't the definition of my act. But it played well in those comedy clubs. And I did work out at one period, at least. I was setting some sort of attendance or sales record in, I think we figured out it was 2/3 of the clubs.
Nice.
Wow.
But there was a reason for that. Totally aside from whether I was good or not. I kept changing my material. I had built up during the course of these 13 years an absurdly large repertoire. And so I made changes in the show every night. And there were 3 reasons for that. One was to keep me engaged, because it's hard, as some of you in this call, it's hard, as you know, to do the same exact act every night. So that was one reason. One reason was to build the interest of the staff, because they can make or break you, right? Yeah. So when it was announced at the club, and coming up next week, Max Maven, the mentalist, the customers, if they didn't know who I was, would turn to the waitress or the bartender and say, "The hell is that?" And an employee is sort of obliged to say, "Oh, he's very good," but the customer can tell if they mean it or not. And the employees liked me at those clubs. First of all, because I did change the act at least partially every night. So unlike most comedians where they could recite the act with the comic after the 3rd night, I always had new stuff that kept them engaged. No, but also I did something which turns out to have been unusual in comedy clubs, which is I always, near the end of my act, did a pitch for tipping. For not forgetting to tip your server, which actually made a difference. I mean, I was told in many clubs by the servers, we always get better tips when you work here. So that was a second reason, was getting their support. But the third reason was, at the end of every show in a nightclub, in a comedy club, I would say, Hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have, please tell your friends about it and get them to come. In fact, come back yourself, because I change the show around every night. If you come back, you'll see something new. And people actually did. So, you know, in some clubs, my record might have been the most drinks sold on a Wednesday. It wasn't always, you know, the most successful week of all time or something. But we figured out that in about 2/3 of the clubs I worked during the peak of that era, there was some kind of record set during each engagement, which meant they wanted me back.
Right? I mean, it's like, oh yeah, I worked this place and this place and this place. Well, did you work them again?
Yeah.
Since people think of you as more of a serious mentalist and doing intellectual material, I'm so curious. Comedy club audiences can be so adversarial. Do you have stories of dealing with hecklers?
Yeah, I have heckler stories. One of my favorite heckler stories, because it has such an odd resolution, took place at the Laugh Stop in Houston.
That was probably me again.
No, it was.
Sorry.
I don't know the year, but somewhere in the 80s, and it was opening night, so it was a Tuesday. I'm pretty sure at that club, Mondays were open mic, and Tuesdays then as now were not usually big business nights, so the club was not full. It wasn't completely empty, but it wasn't a huge audience. And I come out on stage and I start working, and a cowboy, and at this club, many of the audience members, that's an apt description. So a guy wearing, you know, jeans and a plaid shirt and a cowboy hat, sitting with his date off to the side, off to my left. Suddenly, in the middle of whatever, I'm saying some stuff, and he suddenly blurts out at the top of his lungs, "He's got an earring." Now, remembering this is in the early to mid 80s.
I would like to know what that earring means in the
It means he lost the other one, and the other one fell off. I'm going to give you something to
Well, what does it mean?
judge it. What does it mean?
Is that a significant?
Well, interestingly enough, if you can get a close-up on that, there it is. You'll notice it's a pentagram, a 5-pointed star. Now, the pentagram is an ancient symbol. When it's pointed upright, it means goodness, and when it's pointed point down, it means evil. Mm-hmm. You see, and you'll notice that this one turns, so I don't commit myself.
And I thought, okay, this does not sound encouraging. He does not seem to be reporting this fact with favor. What do I do? So I just kept going. And he yelled it out again, but angrier. And I thought, I don't know what to respond. I'd actually had this happen, I think, once before. But when the person had yelled out, "He's got an earring," I was wearing a faux diamond. So I was able to respond. I figure when you can afford a diamond this size, you can wear it wherever you want. But on this particular night, I was not wearing a faux diamond earring, so I couldn't use that line. So I'm on stage, and I'm kind of starting to get a bit nervous because I'm envisioning this guy leaping on the stage, cold cocking me or whatever. And I'm just not sure what to say that might be funny, but also cool him out, because I don't want to say something that's clever and have him react by getting more angry. So he did it a third time. And now I just stopped, and my mind is racing to come up with a solution. And there was a guy sitting at ringside. You'll remember this, Michael, that there was actually a sort of shelf of tables, like a bar counter, that on the edge of the stage on the three sides. So there were people actually sitting with their drinks on a kind of counter.
Yeah,
And
it was like a thrust, right? Wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
And sitting right in the front was another guy wearing jeans and a plaid shirt with a big full beard. And he looked over at the guy who'd been yelling about my earring, and he stood up, and he had to be 6'3", and bigger than Jason as far as bulk. And he stood up and looked over at the guy and said, "Hey, I've got an errand." And he sat back down and he just sort of nodded to me as if to say, "Please continue."
Oh.
I was close enough to him to see he did not have an errand.
He's just
That's
a good
great.
Samaritan.
He just knew that that was the thing to say that was going to shut this guy down and shut this guy up, and the rest of the show went just fine. That's probably my favorite. But that's,
I actually own a couple of your earrings.
why would that be?
Well, when my daughter was born,
Oh, okay.
people sent her gifts.
Now I know where you're going with this.
And my favorite thing that I believe that she received is this. And what this is a Sesame Street count that my good friend Max Maven doctored up with a Max Maven beard and mustache. The widow's peak was already there, but I don't believe the eye makeup and the
I added eye makeup and earrings.
Yeah, and the arched eyebrows, and these earrings in the ear, 2 earrings in his left ear, and this was
We call that port, Mac.
port on the port side of Max Maven, and then a little tag. I don't know if you can see this, but it says "Baby's First Jew." So now we're never going to be able to air this episode.
I got a little piece of trivia I want to run by the group. Max is not allowed to respond yet to this. Nikki, do you have that photo I sent you? I want to know if anyone here besides me knows what's interesting about this book. And I know Jacob is a huge Christopher Reeve fan, but I bet he's never read this. I know Max knows why that's interesting, and I know why it's interesting. Anyone else?
I've never seen that, and it's rare that his face is on anything that I haven't seen.
Yeah. So nobody knows?
No.
No idea.
Can Nikki put it up again?
And I feel like I've heard this before. I have some vague. Can I guess?
You can guess, of course.
Is Max a character in this in some way?
He is. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
Max, tell us how that came to be.
The guy who wrote that book is named Elliot S. Maggin, and I went to college with him. And before he had graduated college, he had become the head writer for Superman comics. So this is back in the early 70s. And he did that for a number of years. He wrote for other comic series as well for the DC line, but Superman was sort of his central favorite. And later into the 70s, they started working on the first of the Christopher Reeve movies. And Elliot said, I'd like to get a chance to work, to submit the script. I mean, I'd like an opportunity to be considered to write the script. And the company, which was both DC and whichever studio put that movie out, I don't remember.
Warner Brothers, I think, the Salkinds.
Anyway, they wouldn't let him submit a script. They said, no, this is a big budget production and you've never written a script. He said, no, but I've written Superman for years. And they said, doesn't matter. We won't even, don't bother. We won't read it. So as a consolation prize, they said, you can write the novel that will come out as the tie-in novel to that first Superman movie. So he did. He wrote a novel called Superman Last Son of Krypton, which was actually far better than the movie.
Don't say that to Jacob. Don't say that to Jacob.
It was a really smart novel. So when they did the second Superman movie, the second Christopher Reeve movie, it was already a given that they weren't going to let him submit a script. So they said, but you can do the novel. And this time, he wasn't obliged to make the novel at all similar in story to the movie. So he wrote the novel, and I think he had it done before the movie was even released. And it was called Superman Miracle Monday. And because he was not required to stick to their script or their storyline, he was able to play.
You were the villain.
One of the games is I'm in the book. I'm not the villain. I'm sort of sinister comic relief. And there is a scene that takes place at the Magic Castle where I meet up with Superman for a sort of caustic conversation in the gym.
The gym of the Magic Castle.
Oh, I was going to say.
Of course.
He'd never been to the Magic Castle. When he wrote the book, I think he was still, I'd moved to LA, but I think he was still living in the East Coast. And he just assumed, there's an exercise room and there's probably a steam bath and all the things you find at private clubs. So there is a scene where I have this conversation.
Bunch of magicians sitting around naked.
He also described a trick. He wrote up a card trick that was essentially a trick he'd seen me do in college. And then he sent me the write-up before the book came out, and he said, "Is this accurate? Is this really the trick I remember seeing you do?" And I said, "Yeah, but it's not it doesn't read as a great trick. It was a great trick when I did it." But I said, and he wrote back and said, just before the internet, he wrote back and said, "Well, what would be a better trick?" And so I took one of Vernon's tricks and described that to him. And he said, "Oh, this is fantastic." And he wrote it up. And after the book was published, he said, "By the way, can you actually do that? Is there an actual method for it?" And it's the trick that Vernon did on a ship, where he, based on a Francis Carlyle thing actually, but where he took a deck of cards and threw it off the edge of the ship, and the cards landed on the water. And so the whole deck scattered and was floating, and the only face-up card was the chosen one.
So I have an interesting story about that.
Can I just say, before you tell that story, that this is the greatest day of my entire life. This is the coolest thing I have ever heard.
So
I'm not even kidding. Go ahead.
So for my little virtual magic show, one of the tricks I thought about doing was that trick in my swimming pool. So I was trying to think of a trick to do with my swimming pool, right? That trick doesn't work.
And this was the trick that Elliot described as if I had done it in the dining area of the Magic Castle. Except to read it described, it didn't sound all that good. And I said, I think it would be a better trick if you describe it that in anger and frustration, I throw the deck in the air and walk out, and when the cards land, the only one that's landed face up is the card they chose. And I was thinking about the Carlyle/Vernon trick, but no water involved. And so Elliot wrote it up, and it sounds fine, and it's in the book. And Elliot later said to me, "Can you really do that?" And the answer, of course, is yes, assuming you clear the room out afterwards and nobody gets to touch any of the
right. No touching, princess. No touching. And let's see. I'll pick Vinny this time. Vinny, what was my favorite thing from the show today?
To learn that you putting on the cape had nothing to do with Elvis, but Gorgeous George.
He's right. Wow.
That's correct. I thought it was Elvis or James Brown, but it turns out it was Gorgeous George. And so, Max, thank you so much to Max Maven, Michael Goudeau, Jax, Nick Diffatte, and Glide Hops Lint. I don't know where that came from. And
that's an anagram of Phil Goldstein.
Vinny Grosso, and of course Nikki and Steven Sikulski at Neon Pineapple. And as we always do, we're ending with a quote from my friend George Clinton. If the shoes are too small, they hurt your feet, and I bet you can't know what's going on if you're asleep. I bet you. See you next week.
Hey, give us some.
Howdy, I'm Matt King. Thanks for watching Don't Everybody Leave. If you don't subscribe and hit that bell to get notifications, I'm going to play these damn bongos.